It's time to take a ride on the Steelers Afternoon Drive with our co-hosts Alan Saunders and Zachary Smith.
Welcome into an episode of Steelers Afternoon Drive. I'm Zachary Smith. That is Alan Saunders. Joining us on today's episode, taking another Steelers Afternoon Drive with us, Nick Farabaugh of SteelersNow.com. Nick, what's going on, pal?
What's going on, man? What's going on? How are you guys doing?
Doing fantastic. Alan and I haven't been able to, so I should let you guys behind the fourth wall a little bit. Friday's episode was actually recorded on Wednesday, so Alan and I haven't recorded a show together since Wednesday. It's felt a little bit out of place. Something's been missing in my life, and now I realized what it was during that time. Alan, how are you doing?
I'm good. Since then, you've become famous, which is nice. You know, it's good to get the love from the four-letter network there. And when's Frymouth coming over here? Is that still a thing that we can make happen, or is that? I don't
absolutely.
know. We got to wait for OTAs, so Nick and I can corner him in the locker room and beat him up and make him come on this show.
I'm starting to think, based off how often him and I are communicating, there's going to be a new variation of grilling and chilling.
That would be that. I'm in for that.
So yes, we'll definitely make sure Pat comes on the afternoon drive as well. But guys, I want to start off talking today with some betting odds. I want to bring betting odds into the show. Pittsburgh Steelers NFL draft odds for pick number 20. And we can go through some of the odds here because there is a noticeable name missing from this list. Jackson Powers Johnson, who we've talked about a lot, out of Oregon, plus 300. Graham Barton out of Duke, which played all along the offensive line. I think if the Steelers took him, we'd probably think, based off their needs, to be playing center, plus 350. Brian Thomas, the wide receiver out of LSU, plus 450. J.C. Latham, the tackle out of Alabama, plus 500. A.D. Mitchell, wide receiver out of Texas. We'll talk about him later as well, plus 500. Troy Fatanu out of Washington, plus 750. And again, he's a versatile guy. I'd be curious where he landed along the offensive line, probably a tackle, at least early. And then the field, plus 1,100. So, guys, not on this list at all. Amarius Mims. What do we make of that?
Bad odds.
Yeah.
I mean,
I like the field for that reason. I would take the field
for a number of reasons. I mean, you're giving me plus 1,100, and I can think of a half a dozen guys that I'm not saying they're the most likely to be drafted, but are easily predictable that the Steelers could very well draft any of the corners, right? Cooper DeJean, Nate Wiggins,
not a single one listed on this.
Not Terrion Arnold. So the sort of four corners there. Amarius Mims, I think, if I was making these odds, I would put him first, let alone not have him on the here altogether.
I agree.
I think he's got to be the favorite right now. Checks every single box. Premium position, moves Broderick back to left tackle. It works beautifully.
Makes you better at two positions, which
exactly.
is if you can do that with your first round pick, that's a pretty good start.
Right, and he's, they've done a lot of work on the first round tackles, so it's clear that they are interested in that. Man, the field here is like so good just because you get not only, the corners, you get Mims, you get a potential Fuaga fall. Like if they trade back and decide to
well, this is at number 20. So
yeah, okay. So I was going to say, but if they trade back, then the odds are off the table. But or would that count as the field? I don't know. But at 20, I mean, listen, the interest they've shown in centers has not been first round indicative at all. So don't really see the center coming in round one. I've said that. I still think it's going to be BPA at premium position. So corner, receiver, tackle feels like the way they're going, leaning tackle, and not having Mims on there, man. It's a nice layup for you if you wanted to. And Latham at 4 also, if he falls, is pretty good odds too. I mean, I would have Latham higher, I feel like, too, than 4th.
Would you take
your guys that are leading the conversation?
Would you take Latham over Mims? I think I would, but would you, and do you think the Steelers would?
No, I don't think he's a great scheme fit. I think, the one thing about Latham is how he's heavy-footed, and, he's a really big dude, but Mims is about 25, 30 pounds lighter, or at least was playing at 25, 30 pounds lighter. Latham showed up at like 345 at the combine, was playing at like 365. which is interesting and never tested throughout the process. Like they do not have testing numbers on Latham, did not test. Mims is testing tomorrow at his personal pro day along with Brock Bowers. That's a very important kind of day for him because Mims needs to check a lot of boxes and become this athletic freak that we think he is. I mean, the tape is what it is. It's fantastic. It's only really 6 real games that you can take from. But those 6 games are as good as anybody's. And at the 20th overall pick, if you can get the guy with that tape, I think I'm taking it just because, moves Broderick back to left tackle, drops Mims in a familiar environment. He'll have Broderick, Pickens, and Darnell Washington, who he already knows. I think that helps a little bit when you're kind of going into an NFL environment, having guys that have been through it, I think that can help a little bit. I think Mims, man, checks so many boxes for them. He's a perfect Steelers tackle, what they like. If you look at what Andy Weidel and Howie Roseman drafted in Philadelphia, like Mims would be very high on their board for what he likes. So I think he's the favorite right now if he can make it to 20th overall. And it's a great scheme fit because I think he can work out in space, get those blocks really well. And he's a plus in pass pro, which I think has to be somewhat of a notice because Broderick Jones's weakness is in pass pro. And of course, how Justin Fields and Russell Wilson are naturally going to hold the ball longer just because that's kind of their style of play.
Yeah, I think too, what you mentioned checking the boxes. Corner would not be where I predicted the Steelers will go in the first round, but the only other guy that checks all the boxes for them so far through this process is the cornerback out of Clemson, Nate Wiggins. So and he's not listed on here either, which is again the reason that if I was betting on this, I'm definitely taking the field.
I think there's some other guys that check most of the box, right? Like Latham does. Is there somebody else
for everything in terms of what normally the
Arnold?
Cool.
Yeah, Terrion Arnold. Yeah, both Alabama corners. Wiggins, Latham. Yeah, so they have some guys. I mean, they have some options here. I mean, technically,
Bowers.
They didn't meet with him. Yeah, I mean, they only met with him at the pro day, but yeah, that they have that one. I mean,
I guess Ladd McConkey technically.
Yep.
Just because he's creeping into those late round 1 convos. So
combine formal Tomlin Connaught pro day pre-draft visit. That's what I was looking at when mentioning just those two.
They generally don't necessarily do all of them. The GM and the head coach at the pro day is the one that's been a long track record of. Combine formal has not always been some guys they have, some guys they haven't, I think.
Yeah, I don't think, especially with
that's fair. I was just trying to figure out where I was coming up with those two names specifically.
Yeah, I'll say also because of how they operated this year, just ignoring the Senior Bowl guys. Knowing who was at the Senior Bowl. Quinyon Mitchell and
Powers Johnson,
basically use those interviews as their formals. So I don't think the combine formal is necessarily a necessary thing. I do like the double up on the pro day 30 visit. I think that's usually pretty indicative of them, pretty indicative of interest. I believe I don't think they've had a necessary 100% accuracy with the 30 visits in the round 1, but I think it's pretty close to that. Obviously Broderick came last year. I believe Najee came, right? Or no, they didn't. I don't think they had 30 visits that year.
It was all in Zoom. I don't remember if he did it or
had
not.
A Zoom. Pickett had a local, I'm assuming, at some point. And then I believe going back, obviously back to 19, Bush did have one. So, I think pro day and those 30 visits are kind of the more important ones.
Yeah. Okay. That's fair. I don't want to spend too much time on this because we've talked so much about, the Steelers not having all the boxes checked going into the draft. It seems kind of odd comparatively, and we keep getting the same comments because we're talking about the same things on here. But one thing that I do want to kind of add to that is not only is it going into the draft imperative for them to check certain boxes, right? Like center, tackle, wide receiver, corner, but they also have to hit on these. If they, for whatever reason, do not have a draft class that comes out of this with like 3 starters, they're going to be in trouble when you look at the way that the roster looks right now. So like, I don't know. We've gotten a lot of pushback because people were commenting saying the season's not starting tomorrow. Like, we get that, but also, man, they're setting themselves up to once again, just like last year, have to hit this draft class completely out of the park.
Yeah, I mean, they're basically, and look, there are going to be guys that are available after the draft, and there'll be guys that'll become available that maybe are not necessarily available right now. You know, guys get drafted over, guys will get cut, whatever, stuff's going to happen. But like, if you look at where the Steelers are right now, they absolutely need from their draft class a starting center and a starting wide receiver at the very least, at the bare minimum. And they probably also would like to upgrade tackle. And I mean, they don't even have a slot corner. Like, you can get, there are lots of those guys out there. So like, that's not as pressing, but like, even just saying this team absolutely needs 2 day 1 starters, picking at 20, like, that doesn't usually happen. Like, that's pretty rare. Like, even if they only get 2 starters of the group that we're talking about that they need, that would be a better than average draft class. And that's going to result in something like someone like Dan Moore or Nate Herbig or Van Jefferson playing a whole lot of meaningful football this year that I think everyone involved would like not to right now. Like, that's pretty, like, they're really setting themselves up to really have to nail this draft in a way that I think, not just in terms of the number of positions they need, but like, these guys are going to have to play right away if this team this year is going somewhere. And it sure looks like they're building this team with a 35-year-old starting quarterback on a 1-year contract, like they're trying to win right now. I've not gone into the last 2 off seasons with that feeling. It felt like this was a team that was building. You just get the young guys, you put them together, you see it, what's what. It does feel like there's been this strategic shift in priorities, that the timelines are moving up and they're going for it, and they want to win a playoff game since they haven't. And man, it is going to require a really, really, really good draft to get there. And I think, I have a lot of faith in Omar Khan's abilities and what they've done so far, but I think probably not talking about it enough, that they have laid themselves out a very difficult path here.
I mean, they have. Again, they're going to be very active post-draft in the free agency market. They are. It's just what's going to happen. Listen, like I'm telling you, there's going to be a splash signing in the post-draft free agency. I don't know if that's going to be Tyler Boyd, if that's going to be maybe Connor Williams is in training camp getting healthier and they decide to smack on that. One of the tackles that's out there, Donovan Smith, Mekhi Becton, someone like that. I don't know. Maybe it's Pat Pete coming back, someone like that. But they're going to make some move post-draft. I know they are, because they made 3 of them last year, where Chan Sullivan, Quan Alexander, Marcus Golden all came on, and all 3 of those guys ended up playing at least semi-significant roles. Quan Alexander became a starter. So listen, that's going to be the final piece of the puzzle. But this draft basically is going to be about, in my opinion, loading up the premium positions. Like, that's what it's going to be. Again, I don't think center is even, I don't want to say it's completely out of play at 20, but I do not expect it.
I agree.
I think it's going to be OT, wide receiver, corner, probably OT. And then second round, you open up the board. But they are definitely going to have to hit on those picks. Like, if they draft a receiver and that receiver isn't good, they are in trouble. Now, maybe that receiver is in, maybe they're in OTAs, don't like what that receiver's doing, and they ring a call up to DJ Chark or something like that. Like, I don't know, but they have to hit on these. And last year they did. They hit on their first 3 picks. Really, they hit on their first 5 picks. I mean, all top 5 picks played significant snaps or had impacts. When you look at what Broderick Jones, Joey Porter Jr., Keanu Benton, Darnell Washington, Nick Herbig all did, they all played roles. They're going to need another class like that. And like, the only way you do that is by maximizing value and drafting BPA. So they're going to have to do it again. and the board fell very favorably to them last year, like extremely. I don't know. Sometimes that requires a little luck to happen where Joey Porter Jr. falls to 32. Like, okay, that could have easily been, someone else where he's not on the board. Who knows? Keanu Benton, who was clearly the D line they wanted all year long, fell right into their laps with their second round pick. Darnell Washington experienced a slide no one saw coming. And then Herbig, was an interesting prospect that kind of just fits what they like at that position, like perfectly. So they need a little bit of luck here too, right? Zach Frazier needs to fall to 51. Leggett needs to be there 51 or something like that, where you just get value. And that's why I think you can anticipate the Steelers moving around the board multiple times. I think to maximize value. And I do expect either a trade back. I could see them doing a trade back in the first round and then moving back up from 51. Like they could do that and wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, somebody did that in a mock draft on Friday. It didn't work out so well for me. But do you think that
I like the thought process?
Yeah, I did too. Do you think that not just the fact that they have to hit on these guys, but that they really need probably more than one of them to play right away changes the targets in your mind? Do you look at some guys and be like, hey, look, I see Keon Coleman and I see a 6'4" guy who runs like the wind and has some tools that look pretty high level, but also like his overall game is kind of a mess and he's a little bit of a project. Like, do you cross some of those guys off the list just because it seems like their play in 2024 is almost just as important as how good they're eventually going to be?
I mean, I think you do it at like tackle, where the obvious reason to draft the tackle is to go over somebody. Like, are you drafting a raw corner? Like in like round 1, for example? Probably not, right?
Right.
But
because
are you
you
drafting
have Porter and Jackson, right?
Like, I don't know. Are you drafting?
You have more.
Like, are you drafting Malachi Corley in round 3 just because he's raw? I mean, I think you would draft him at 84.
Yeah, I think probably.
Like, I think the first 2 rounds, yes, you like want polish, but also, I just think the Steelers aren't dumb, and they know that this year is, while it's one of urgency and they want to win, like there's a very real chance that the quarterback upgrades that they made just aren't very good and doesn't actually make a super tangible difference. Because another thing that's going under the radar right now, if you do strength of, I know it's preseason and we're in April, but if you do strength of schedule estimates, the Steelers have the 3rd hardest schedule in the NFL right now by estimates. Of course, the other 2 in front of them are in their division because the AFC North is an absolute meat grinder. But I think that is something to think about. So I don't know if you're going to pass up, like, let's say a somewhat raw prospect like Troy Franklin is a guy that doesn't have like a ton of polish, but a ton of innate talent. If he falls to 51, are you really not going to draft him? I mean, he's got star potential, right? Like, okay, you trade back from 20, and by somehow you're at like 26, and Brian Thomas, who is clearly very raw still, but is immensely talented. Are you just going to pass him up? I don't think so. But I think it does change consideration a little bit. Like, I think it's less likely they draft Tyler Gate, like, because he's not the type of guy that you're going to pick there. So if you have a polished prospect like Mims there, for example, Fatanu, you're probably going to take that. At center, you're probably less likely to take one of those other guys that clearly a good center class, but is Bo Limmer starting day 1? No. Can he start in year 2 or year 3? Yeah, he could be a good player, but you're probably going to draft a more polished guy like Cedric Van Pran or Zach Frazier. So I do think it changes the considerations a little bit, but I think if the value's right, I mean, you got to take the swing on it. I think that you have to, but if there's a more polished guy there, probably you take that guy.
I like how you broke that down, sort of separating the first 2 picks, because that's where you really have to get value. And like, you have to, those guys have to play almost right away. I mean, can you even envision a scenario where pick 20 like doesn't start? Like it's pretty tough. I guess Mims, with his lack of experience, could not start right away. That'd be the one. And I think Dan Moore is probably of the guys that you're trying to draft over the most established. But man, like it almost seems like they absolutely have to get production this year out of those first couple picks.
I mean, yeah, I mean, if they draft Mims, that could be one. But my guess is also like, okay, they draft Amarius Mims. Well, Broderick's probably going to be training at left tackle most of the time because they're going to want to be back to left. So I don't know. That's a tougher one, right? Where, yeah, Moore is probably the one guy who has like a ton of starting experience and could start, but the supposed left tackle starter would probably want to be trained at left tackle. So I think that's a little tough to sell. Maybe if they draft one of these corners, Dante Jackson still trots out there week 1, but that feels like to me more of a okay. They draft
Joey was last year. Like whether you start or not, you're still going to play from the beginning,
right?
And you get there eventually.
Right. Like I don't know. I don't really think so though. Like I'm reaching here, and that center prospect. If they draft Barton, JPJ in round 1, that's guy starting. If you draft
wide receiver, any wide receiver is immediately second on the depth chart. In fact, any wide receiver in like the first 3 rounds is immediately second on the depth chart, basically.
I guess like the one scenario I could see, and this is just like a very specific player, is like they draft Cooper DeJean and view him more as a safety slot and he only starts in the slot. Like, but like other than that, like I am reaching. I
still call the nickel a starter. Anyway,
right. So. Like he would start in the nickel. He just probably he's not like usurping Deshaun Elliott like week 1 probably is like next to Minka. Yeah. But like that is like that's a far off scenario. I think you have to start that guy week 1. Just because I'm gonna be real, dude. Like, look at who they'd be replacing. Like Dan Moore is not a good player. The guys they have a receiver,
at center and wide receiver, like Van Jefferson and Nate Herbig. Like not.
I mean, respectfully to those guys.
Yeah, I mean, if you're not drafting over those guys successfully with your first or second round pick, then you probably did not do a very good job of it.
I agree.
Right. Yeah. What's interesting too about the thing that you said with ready guys, like Alan, we kind of had that conversation last week when talking about receivers, maybe being like, if you have 2 guys somewhat close, maybe it's the difference towards taking it. Like a Jamari Thrash out of Louisville, who's 24, played a lot of football. Maybe that's the separator. The fact that he has so much experience and could come in and be a ready-made guy is a guy that maybe has a little bit higher of a ceiling, but wouldn't be able to play right away.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's a lot of those guys that I think move up a little bit because of polish, or maybe move down a little bit because of question marks. Or maybe just projections, right? I think it's always easier if you're talking about a rookie, like a guy you've seen do the job compared to like a projection you're making. I think that's always a little bit easier. Anything else on this? I want to talk about some day 3 stuff too.
Yeah. Nope. That was it for that.
Only last thing I really want to add is tackle specifically is if they don't get one in round 1, that is like pushed off. Like you're not the second round tackles, the third round tackles are all rawer guys. So like it's very rare where I see a scenario they draft the tackle at 51.
I kind of agree with that. Okay. Honestly, like we've talked about the tackles down the line, but like I'm not it's a good tackle class because there's 7 or 8 guys that I really, really like. But once you get through them, I mean, I guess there's some interesting guys on day 2, like Amagaji from Yale and Mackinsalvis and Roger Rosengarten. Those are all guys that are interesting to me. Patrick Paul, but I don't know that you're like, I think you could. I don't know. I think you almost need a first round pick or a traded up early second round pick to make an impact at tackle. And with the number of guys here, I don't know why you wouldn't, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. But you mentioned the day 3 stuff, the day 3 needs that they have. kind of going along with their 30 visits and the interest they've shown. And I actually want to start with a position that we haven't really touched on at all. Whether you want to consider, again, edge is kind of a category now for defensive ends and outside linebackers. So you can kind of group those together just in terms of the edge that they are looking for. I don't know if they're going to bring back Marcus Golden or what, but yeah, TJ Watt, Alex Highsmith, Nick Herbig, who we saw obviously the flashes from, and I feel comfortable about him in terms of being a part of the rotation. But, that would still be somebody that they're going to add a body to at some point, whether that is at some point in the draft or another free agent, whether that is bringing Marcus Golden back. But, what are both of your guys' thoughts on that position and interest or lack thereof from the team?
Yeah, I wrote today there was some reported interest between the Steelers and Ovi Okufo from LSU, who played D-end in their defense. And some people have said he's probably more likely to be an off-ball linebacker at the NFL level. Steelers obviously drafted a guy who everybody, including me, said was going to be an off-ball linebacker at the NFL level. And I think Nick Herbig proved a whole bunch of us wrong and did just fine at edge. I don't know where they're scouting him. If they sent Carl Dunbar to his pro day, but that was probably more for the D tackles than for him. I just think it's interesting because it hasn't been talked about and it hasn't really been scouted at all. And I don't even know that, I like Nick Herbig. I think he did a good job. If TJ Watt was hurt and could not play, could Nick Herbig do the job down in and down out over the course of an entire season? I'm not sure. He is undersized for the position. And he's been very good, but most of the times when they have given him reps, it's been sort of in those primed up pass rushing situations. He hasn't faced a lot of, you're facing their 4-minute drill and we have to get some run stops and their fullback is coming at you kind of situations for him. So whether he could even do the job is still a little questionable. I don't even know if they would want him to go in as the number 3. Certainly he's part of the mix there, but they really need another body at edge. I don't think we talked about it at all. When you're looking at the draft board and the needs for day 3, we've talked how there's kind of 5 positions. We've talked about for day 1 and 2, it's center and tackle, wide receiver, corner, defensive tackle. One of those probably falls into the 4th round. I know you guys talked a lot about defensive tackle on Monday. And so there's those 2 6th-round picks. They've shown a lot of interest in off-ball linebackers. They sent Aaron Curry out on the pro day circuit. I think that seems likely for one of them. I think edge could be the other one. I don't know. Is there another position you guys see as a day 3 need that this team should be looking at, or maybe you think is looking at and maybe just isn't being talked about?
Second, another wide receiver, I think, is pretty obvious on the board. I still think they're going to double dip at receiver, just because of the wide-ranging archetypes of guys they've looked at. It's not a clear pattern, so tells me they're looking at 2 different guys probably there. Edge is interesting. I think Herbig's a stud just in the limited snaps he did to have the production, impact plays he did. I also think that they probably like Jeremiah Moon. I do think that is something to consider just because he's a special teamer, can be a plus there. And I think that's a position they can easily just call Marcus Golden back. And I actually think that probably ends up happening. That's just my feel on that. He was solid last year, can be a rotational guy. So, I mean, edge is a need, but I think it could sort it out one way or the other. And, Jeremiah Moon is a freak athlete, very good special teamer. So I think there's something there to look at. Inside linebacker, I think, is pretty clearly the other one where what if Cole Holcomb is not ready for the season, right? Maybe he is, going to play, but maybe he's not ready for week 1. They probably would need someone there because outside of that, it's just Patrick Queen and E-Rob. So, Mark Robinson kind of started to come on a little bit at the end of last year, but don't feel fully comfortable with that. I think outside corner probably can get thrown in this bucket just because I feel like we kind of think slot is probably going to be where they end up going. So, a pure outside corner, I think will get thrown in that bucket. Safety, I think, is another one that you have to think about at least. I think they have enough there with Trent Thompson as like a young upside piece that has played a little bit. But if they like a guy, I don't think you can fully rule it out. Guard, I think, is another one where the guard market's really exploded. Daniels is on an expiring contract. the right guy comes along, maybe there. But I think edge, inside linebacker, and probably pure outside corner are probably the three I would throw in there.
Well, the scenario that I thought of, I know you mentioned slot earlier, but I thought, say they wait a little bit on corner, maybe like Renardo Green or something at 84. Maybe he's where they go in the third round. And then they wait on slot until day 3. And it's like a Jarvis Brownlee or MJ Devonshire who they've shown interest in. So that would be the double dip at corner, obviously in the opposite direction of what you said.
Daquan Hardy would be awesome just because of his punt returning abilities too.
Yeah.
Could be a good pick. I could see that. I still think the most likely double dip position is receiver. It makes the most sense to me. I think, what they've shown so far in kind of the interest of corner, it's almost all slot related, with Melton, Phillips, Sanders still. It certainly feels like 98 or 119 is where they're going to end up addressing that pick.
Started to really like Melton, by the way, the more that I watch him.
Yeah, and the pure outside guys that are in that range, the guys like Kyrie Jackson and Cam Hart, they haven't really shown as much interest in, right? I mean, they did see them at the Senior Bowl, but the sort of pure outside guys have kind of left alone. But like Sam Ristel, Melton, those guys have been kind of more on. Kamari Lassiter, I think, probably could play both, but I think is probably more of a slot. They double dipped with him too. Rakestraw, they had a formal with at the combine. So I think it's going to be a slot type, but I agree. If they get some good value on like a projectable corner late, I could see it happening.
Yeah. I mean, day 3, is really about filling out the depth needs. And I just feel like the obvious depth needs are probably an inside linebacker, because they probably have better info on Cole Holcomb than I do right now. I think, D-line is a clear depth need, but I feel like that's going to be a first 5 pick kind of address need just by how they're going about scouting these D linemen right now. Like, it certainly feels like that. I could see like a guard if the value is really good. I could see that happening just because, again, the Daniels, Herbig, both free agents after this year. If they like a guy enough, they could pull it on that. I would, before the Pruitt signing, I thought tight end was a real sneaky day 3 pick. Just because.
Well, and I thought running back before Patterson too, but it seems like they kind of checked some of those boxes along the way.
Yeah, and I think quarterback by signing Kyle Allen is the same way. I think they're going to get a UDFA to kind of fill that void at the 4th quarterback spot. So I really look at guard, and we're talking really with the 6th round picks, not with that 4th round pick. It's a day 3 pick, but really, I'm talking guard, probably 2nd receiver, outside corner, safety, backer, edge, but really inside linebacker and edge feel like the guys they could. And they have scouted a few edges, like Mo Camara, they saw at the Shrine Bowl and they've shown some interest in. Austin Booker, they like a little bit. Your guy Eric Watts is another guy.
I do really like him, man.
Yeah, he's an interesting player. So there's a few guys there, but basically fill out the depth needs. I think inside linebacker does feel like one of those 6th round picks is going to be an inside linebacker. Maybe even earlier if they get the right value on like Cedric Gray, or someone like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we got here, I know we did want to answer at least one question here from YouTube. Tesnas says, if they really wanted extra day 2 picks, would it make sense to make the trade prior to draft day? That way you don't have to worry about your guy being gone if you trade back in the moment.
I mean, we're talking about trading back from 20 here, right? I mean, I think it's hard to envision a team wanting to trade up to 20. When you see the moves that happen ahead of time, it's usually early in the draft where teams have a very good idea what everybody ahead of that pick is doing. And so like they know, right now somebody pretty much knows if they want to get JJ McCarthy, they got to get to 4 at least, right? If they want to get Roma Dunze, they got to get to 7 at least, right? Like it pretty obvious where you need to get to. it's very unclear if you're trying to move up to get Jackson Powers Johnson. Do you have to go to 20? Maybe he'd fall to 25. Maybe he'll fall to 35. Maybe he'll fall to 45. I don't know. It becomes a lot less clear. And so I think the idea of trading back ahead of time from 20 feels unlikely to me. I think the Steelers would be willing to do it. I'm not sure about what the team coming up is doing, making that trade ahead of time.
Kind of weird. And the Steelers don't feel like the type of team to do like what the Texans did.
That's what I was just going to mention.
Took a 20 fall slide out of the first. It doesn't feel like they would do that to me. I think they value the 5th-year option and they need a guy that can play right away. Whereas the Texans are like a team that has needs, but like have guys that could be transitional guys pretty easily throughout their entire roster. So I don't think they're in the position to make that type of move. And as Alan said, I just don't think a team is going to be incentivized to trade up that early, right? It doesn't make a lot of sense. Like if you're trading up earlier in the draft, you are incentivized because you get into a quarterback position. But like, what is at 20? I mean, that could be the scenario where the Steelers, are trading out. Maybe a team wants to come up for a quarterback, but you can't predict that. Where Penix or Knicks are going to go. Maybe one of the teams wants Penix or Knicks and wants to come up to 20. But what if they go 12 to the Broncos, 13 to the Raiders? Like, what if that happens? So I don't think, a team needs to know who's going to be there, and the Steelers need to know who's going to be there. Like, there have been crazy things. Did anyone expect Christian Gonzalez to be there at 17 last year, which is where he was picked?
I mean, this, like you're saying, like this pick is worth so much more. What if Brock Bowers falls? Like, what if Penix is there? There's gonna be guys that somebody really wants that will make this pick more valuable. And then from the Steelers' own standpoint, I don't know, old fashioned who falls to 20. And if they traded that pick that 2 weeks before the draft, they're gonna be standing there kicking themselves, right? I mean, like you can't. I think it's really hard. The one I see that like a team, the one scenario I see where a team might be willing to make this trade up ahead of time is I think there are only 2 teams that don't have a first round pick. It's Carolina and Cleveland. Cleveland doesn't have very many picks in general. I think they only have 5, so they're probably not going anywhere. But Carolina does have some extra picks. They've got 2 seconds and a third. And so maybe if Carolina just says, we want to be in the first round, that would be a reason for them to come up and make the trade ahead of time as opposed to just waiting to see who's there.
Could work. If they really want one of Brian Thomas or AD Mitchell. I think that's the move.
And the Steelers picking at 33 then would feel very good about getting a center with that pick. I think that's kind of right in the range for one of Powers Johnson, Barton, Frazier. Like you'll get one there.
I mean, 100%. What would they get for that? Do you think they'd get both 33 and 39? I don't think they would, but they'd probably get the top third. I mean, they could get a nice pick for that. And that would be, I mean, at 33 also, even if they didn't like the board heading into day 2, that's another potential get back out scenario where they could move back again and get something for it. Like that is possible too. I think they liked it last year when they were the team kind of sitting there overnight thinking about what was going to happen. Joey Porter Jr. obviously was right there, so they ended up taking him, but he wasn't. I think they might have thought about trading out of it. So what if Barton and JPJ are gone and they don't love Frazier enough to take him there? Move back a little bit. So I like that position of power too. That's an interesting scenario I never thought of, but I also think
you could do like you couldn't do both seconds, but you could do like
they have 65 as well. I don't know.
Well, you could do like the first 2 picks for the first 2 picks, right? So you could go 33 and 39 for 20 and 51.
I think I'd probably just take 65
or take 65.
Yeah, that's what I would do. I think I'd take
I
65.
say, given the number of needs that the Steelers have, would you rather just take the
I think
swaps,
I'd rather
or
have
would
the
you rather
extra
have the
pick.
extra?
I think I'd rather the
Yeah.
extra pick, especially 65. That's a really good pick. Like,
Dude, that's it. I mean, it's a late second, basically early third.
Mhm.
You could get, I mean, that at that point allows you to get not only the musts, then you get a one.
now you get all 5 of the positions that you really need
Plus,
in the first 2 days of the draft.
then
If
it
you
frees
can
up.
still get a tackle, though, like you talked about, if they trade down to 33, where does tackle get drafted, if at all? Because
I mean, that's prime position for Jordan Morgan, Kingsley Suamatea.
maybe Tyler Guyton's there at 33. That would be very nice.
Something like
I don't
that.
know if it'll happen.
I think they'd sit there and maybe, you're right in that second crop of receivers with Worthy and Franklin and Coleman, and maybe A.D. Mitchell falls out of the first round and he's sitting there overnight. Center, obviously, if what is being said is true, Mel Kiper's talked about how he thinks Jackson Powers Johnson is going to be a day 2 pick. If he's sitting there overnight, if that happened and they traded back to 33 and JPJ was sitting there at 33, I'm pretty certain he would be the pick. That's just my guess.
I think it would be a good pick there.
Yeah, I think it'd be a great pick because you would maximize value, get an extra day 2 pick. But again, that could then free up, one of those picks to be a want. And what I mean by that is, okay, you like inside linebacker. Well, maybe you're sitting there at 65 and Edge Cooper's there and you want to pull the trigger on that. Or Braden Fisk is at 65 and you want to get a D lineman like that. Darius Robinson falls or something, like just something like that, that you could now kind of actually do. You can get a guy that you might want rather than need, but you might have to pass. So, I mean, that's what happened last year with that 3rd round pick, right? They addressed D-line, corner, tackle, which were their top 3 needs, and they sat there at 80, and you were thinking, maybe they go receiver. That could be something for a future pick or something, but tight end was a great value because Darnell Washington fell and they got him. So I like getting the extra day 2 pick just because I think it allows the Steelers to comfortably be BPA. And I think that's how they really, really operate. I think that's how Omar Khan operates.
Last thing before we get out of here, I just want to ask both of you this. So as people that were going to be covering the draft, what does that do? Like, would you be frustrated if the Steelers did not make a selection during round 1? Would you feel like what you obviously have to write about the trade of them trading back, but what would your feelings be if the Steelers traded that 1st round pick?
Doesn't matter.
Because to me, I'm like, as somebody that's going to be doing a live stream for the entire 1st round, and if the Steelers don't make a selection on night 1, I'm gonna be like, what did we just do this for?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's probably some of that. I also think there's just a high level of interest in the 1st round of the draft, even if your team, like, I don't think the Browns reporters are taking Thursday night off just because they don't have a pick in the 1st round, right? I mean, I think you're still a lot of there's still a lot of interest and tea leaf reading, how's the board falling, that kind of thing that you get out of the 1st round. The one that I really the one you really want is, as someone who covers the draft, is when you're sitting there on day 3 and they trade away their last pick. That's the one that it's like, everybody gets to go home 2 hours earlier. I don't have to watch names I barely recognize scroll by on the board anymore. Like, the Steelers not being in the 7th round this year is a wonderful gift. Very happy with that.
Yeah, I enjoy the draft. Covering it too. It's fun. It's one of my favorite events in sports, honestly, just because the NFL's done an incredible job of building this thing up to be a spectacle of what it is. But I'm with Alan. Waiting last year where the Steelers were. They were one of the last picks in the entire draft, right? When they picked Spencer Anderson. So, I mean, that's a
2
huge
years in a row, because it was Oladokin was with the very end too, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, when they're last there as a reporter, you're like, ugh. Like it's like an overtime game when you're playing on Monday Night Football. It's like, dude, come on.
All right. Well, good conversation. Great stuff as always. Nick, we will start with you. Tell the people they can find you.
Yeah, find me on Twitter, X at Farabaugh Make sure to read the stuff at the Steelers site, of course, and subscribe to Steelers Now right here on the YouTube channel.
There we go. And Alan, tell the people where they find you.
At Saunders_PGH on X, PGH Steelers Now, SteelersNow.com. Yeah, that's it.
Nick already said, Nick's got the YouTube thing this down now as well. He said like and subscribe, but hit that notification bell as well, because you will know every single time that something new is posted. Hit us in the comments.
You can also
with any
do the
thoughts.
same thing if you're into just the reading at SteelersNow.com. You can sign up with the email notifications. Then you get an email every time we post a new story, or you can get an email once a day that has like a whole sort of digest of all the stories we posted. Really cool feature we probably don't talk enough about, but it's right there on the right sidebar of the homepage.
People should do that. Absolutely. And don't get me wrong, they 100% should, but that's a lot of emails, Alan. I mean, there's like,
listen,
1,000 stories posted a day or something like that.
My uncle had a problem with the interface or whatever. There was like something, or he wasn't getting the emails. And it was like a crisis level event where like I got texts multiple times a week about getting his email working again. So look, if you want it, you want it, and you want it the way you want it, and you can get it in your inbox if that's the way you want it.
There we go. And just like this podcast, if you want it in audio form, for whatever reason you don't want to look at us and you're listening to us as opposed to viewing, then leave us a 5-star review and subscribe over there as well. But other than that, for Zachary Smith, PGH, Alan Saunders, don't know where Nick went, but he was on the show as well. So shout out to Nick Farabaugh. Thanks for jumping in to take another ride on the Steelers Afternoon Drive.